The rain in Blackfall doesn't just fall, it attacks. It hammers the thin roof of my studio apartment, a relentless drum against the cheap tin. Down by the North Lake River, you learn to live with the damp, the smell of silt and rust that creeps in through the window frames, no matter how much tape you use. I huddled over the kitchen counter, which was also my dining table and my desk, nursing a cup of instant coffee that tasted like burnt plastic. The classified section of the Blackfall Chronicle was spread open, the newsprint already limp from the humidity. My brother, Rowan, needed another surgery. The construction gig, the one that was supposed to get us ahead, had instead sent him tumbling 3 stories down onto unforgiving concrete. The doctors used words like neurological and extensive, and all I heard was the sound of a cash register ringing up a bill I could never pay. That's when I saw it, tucked between ads for overnight stalkers and short-order cooks, a small, discreet box Rookhaven estate, seeking flexible sanitation staff, premium rates, strict background check. Rookhaven, even down here in the Riverside slums, that name meant something. It was a shadow cast from the hills, a place of rumors. People didn't just work at Rookhaven, they were absorbed by it. The estate belonged to Damien Rourke, a name whispered in loading docks and back alleys, a name synonymous with power, the kind that didn't need to advertise. They said he owned half the Iron Bridge district, the half that mattered, the half that moved things in the dead of night. Flexible sanitation staff, a janitor, a maid. My hand instinctively went to my collar, my fingers finding the familiar, cool metal of my mother's lucky charm, a simple silver lapel pin, a dandelion head etched into its surface, seeds scattering. Make a wish. Alara, find the strength to blow. I needed this job. Rowan needed this job. The rumors didn't matter. The churning in my stomach didn't matter. I tore the ad out, my knuckles white. 2 days later, I was standing outside gates that looked like they belonged on a fortress. Rookhaven Estate wasn't just on a hill, it was the hill, a monolithic structure of dark stone and reflective glass that seemed to drink the weak. Midwestern sunlight, the rain was back, plastering my thin jacket to my skin as I spoke into an intercom that probably cost more than my apartment building. I was buzzed through 3 separate checkpoints before I even reached the front door, which was opened by a woman who looked as severe and unyielding as the house itself. She was older, dressed in a crisp, dark uniform, her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed painful. "Miss Quinn, I am Mrs. Prynne." Her voice was low, carrying the clipped authority of someone who had managed empires. "You are punctual. That is a promising start." She led me through hallways that felt more like canyons. The silence was unnerving. It was the middle of the afternoon, but the heavy drapes and dark wood swallowed the light. Everything was polished to a terrifying gleam, marble floors, mahogany panels, brass fixtures. It smelled of old money, beeswax, and something metallic I couldn't place. "Your interview is for a night shift custodial position," she said, not looking back. "You will be assigned to the East Wing, public areas, offices, the kitchens. You will not, under any circumstances, enter the West Wing. That is the family residence. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am. Perfectly." We entered a large, sterile kitchen, the kind you see in magazines, all stainless steel and granite. A man was leaning against a counter, arms crossed. He wore a simple black suit, but it fit him in a way that suggested it wasn't just for show. His posture was alert, his eyes a piercing, skeptical hazel swept over me, cataloging every weakness. "This is Mr. Fenn, Mrs., Prynne said. "He's the head of estate security." Jax Fenn didn't nod, and he just watched me. Clean record. Alara Quinn, some volunteer work at the crisis center, CPR certified, basic psychological first aid. He recited my life like it was a grocery list. Why Rookhaven? You don't strike me as someone who enjoys cleaning up other people's messes. The unspoken question hung in the air. What are you really after? "My brother needs medical care. Mr. Fenn, expensive care. I'm here for the premium rates. I'm a hard worker, I'm quiet, and I keep my head down." His gaze lingered, assessing. "This isn't a normal house. Miss Quinn, the hours are long. The standards are absolute." "I understand," I said, meeting his stare. "Mrs. Prin sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering. She looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Frankly, Mr. Fenn, we need the staff. The turnover—" She trailed off, glancing at a security monitor mounted by the pantry. On the screen, a grainy black and white image showed a hallway. A woman, a nanny, judging by her bright smock, was grabbing her coat, her face a mask of frustration, gesturing wildly to someone off camera. "That's the 12th one. Mrs." Prin murmured, mostly to herself. "Number 12. And the agency says it's the last. They're blacklisting us." "The kid doesn't trust anyone," Jax Fenn said, his voice dropping. "And the press is circling, just waiting for a story. A Rourke heir who's unmanageable. They'd love that." A cold dread settled in my stomach. They were talking about a child. As if summoned, a sound pierced the oppressive silence of the estate. It wasn't just a cry. It was a scream, a raw, desperate, agonizing wail of pure terror that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was the sound I'd heard at the crisis center, the sound of a nervous system pushed past its breaking point. "Mrs. Prin winced. Jax Fenn's jaw tightened. "That, Mrs. Prin said, her voice strained, "is Theo, Mr. Rourke's son. He's 3 years old." The screaming continued, punctuated by a frantic, rhythmic thud, thud, thud. "He's overstimulated," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My training kicked in, my brain automatically analyzing the sound. He's terrified of a stranger, and now he's hitting something to try and ground himself. The screaming is a release. Both of them stared at me. I flushed, realizing I had crossed a line. "I'm sorry. The volunteer work, we dealt with sensory episodes." The wailing hitched, turning into a desperate, gasping sob. It was coming from down the hall, from the forbidden West Wing. "He won't eat," Mrs. Prin said, her professional facade cracking, revealing a deep, weary sadness. "He hasn't slept properly in days. Every therapist, every specialist, every nanny, they all fail. A simple touch makes him panic. And Mr. Rourke—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "The master of the house was a subject you didn't elaborate on." I learned later what she couldn't say. That in his study, Damien Rourke was staring at spreadsheets of failure. His son was wasting away, and his empire was under attack. His top advisor, a sharp woman named Maya Corin, was reporting that the Bureau of Citywide Integrity was sniffing around his charity funds. At the same time, a rival outfit, the Sarto Syndicate, was hijacking his nighttime transport routes, the ones the North Lake Maritime Commission was supposed to be overseeing. He was a king besieged from without and crumbling from within. But in that moment, all I knew was the sound. It was a physical thing, a weight in the air. I could feel the child's panic in my own chest. Without thinking, I found myself walking toward the sound, drawn by an instinct I couldn't name. "Miss Quinn, Mrs." Prin snapped, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. I stopped at the entrance to the main hall, a vast, shadowy space that separated the east and west wings. The crying was clearer here, echoing off the marble. I could hear the child's breathing. It was too fast, shallow and ragged. Hypoventilation. My fingers found the pin on my collar again. I closed my eyes, just for a second, and focused on the sound. My old instructor's voice came back to me. "You can't stop the panic. Alara, you have to meet it. Give it a pattern." My fingers started to tap, almost imperceptibly, against my leg, a slow, steady rhythm. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 2, 3, 4. A simple box-breathing cadence. I tapped it out, focusing all my intention on that closed door down the hall, trying to send a signal of calm through the sheer force of will. The wailing didn't stop, but the pitch changed, the frantic edge softened, just a fraction. He was listening. The West Wing is off limits to new staff." The voice came from the shadows behind me. It was deep, controlled, and colder than the rain outside. I spun around. He was darkness solidified. Damien Rourke. He hadn't walked up. He had simply appeared in the arched doorway. He was taller than I'd expected, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that made him seem less like a man and more like a feature of the house itself. His hair was black. His face was sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes, they were the most arresting thing. A pale, glacial gray, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that pinned me to the spot. He took a step forward, and the light from a distant chandelier caught the hard lines of his face. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, haunted and sharp, running on pure, uncut will. He was stressed, not just as a businessman, but as a father. I recognized the signs, the tension in his jaw, the hollows under his eyes, the almost invisible tremor in his hand as he clenched it at his side. He looked from me to the closed door of the West Wing, his gaze narrowing. The crying from behind the door was already ramping back up, the brief lull broken by his presence. I heard the crying," I stammered, feeling ridiculous. "I'm Alara Quinn. I'm here for the custodial interview." Damien Rourke looked at me, his gray eyes sweeping over my damp jacket, my worn-out shoes, and my mother's silver pin. His expression was impenetrable. For a split second, something flickered in that icy gaze. Not surprise, exactly, confusion. A momentary glitch in his absolute control, as if he'd seen a piece that didn't fit the puzzle. Then it was gone, shuttered away. "Mrs. Prin is handling the interviews," he said, his voice flat, dismissing me entirely. He turned his attention back to the dark hallway of the West Wing, his shoulders rigid, bracing himself to walk back into the storm his son was creating. He was a king in a fortress, and his heir was a prisoner in his own mind, and I, Alara Quinn, needing money for my brother, had just tapped on the dungeon door. I got the job. It wasn't a celebration, Mrs. Prin had hired me with a kind of grim desperation, as if she were stocking a pantry she knew was infested. My encounter with Damien Rourke had been filed away as an anomaly. I was given a gray smock, a magnetic ID badge that didn't have my name on it, and a schedule that started at 10 at night and ended at 6 in the morning. My first assignment, predictably, was the East Wing, polishing floors so clean you could see your own terrified reflection in them. But I could still hear him. The West Wing was a separate entity, but the sound traveled those high, thin screams of a child trapped in a feedback loop of his own terror. After 3 nights of scrubbing grout and listening to that sound, I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't going to break the rules. I wasn't going to go to the West Wing, but I couldn't do nothing. From the East Wing supply closet, I took a stack of plain, white copy paper, and from a child's art station in one of the empty formal rooms, I took a box of crayons. I checked the label unscented, wax-based, safe. The next night, I was assigned to the Grand Library. It shared a wall with the West Wing playroom. The screaming was muffled, but it was there, a constant, frantic vibration. I polished the long mahogany table. I dusted books that hadn't been touched in decades, and then, in a quiet corner, near the wall that separated us, I sat on the floor. I took a single sheet of paper, and I began to fold. My mother had taught me. It was the one calm thing we had in our own chaotic life, a sharp crease. "Alara, make your intentions clear." I folded a paper crane. The sound was quiet, but distinct in the silent house. The shh of the paper, the thunk of a fingernail running along a new edge. On the other side of the wall, the screaming paused. It was just for a second, a gasp for air, then it resumed, but the rhythm was broken. I took another sheet. I started again. Shh, thuck, a steady, predictable pattern, a sound that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. The screaming subsided. It didn't stop. It wound down, like a motor running out of gas, into a high-pitched, exhausted whimper. I finished the second crane and set it on the table. I went back to polishing. The next night, Mrs. Prin met me at the door, her face pale. "Your assignment has been changed." My heart hammered. I was fired. "You will be cleaning the West Wing playroom." She led me down the forbidden hall. My pulse was so loud I was sure she could hear it. She opened the door. The room was beautiful and completely wrong. It was filled with the most expensive toys, imaginable electric cars, a dollhouse the size of my apartment, silk-dressed dolls with dead glass eyes, and in the far corner, on a small mat, sat Theo. He was tiny for 3, pale, with huge, dark eyes that were just like his father's. He was watching me, his entire body coiled like a spring, his hands fisted in his pajamas. A new nanny, a young girl who looked terrified, was sitting bolt upright on a chair 10 feet away from him. He has been quiet, Mrs. Prin whispered, as if afraid to break the spell. "Since last night." I nodded, my throat dry. "I'll start with the floors." I didn't look at him. I didn't speak to him. I was just a shape, a new part of the furniture. I got my bucket, my soft cloths, and I started work on the far side of the room, my back to him. The nanny let out a shaky breath and slipped out of the room, grateful for the reprieve. We were alone. The silence was louder than the screaming had been. It was heavy, vibrating with tension. I could feel his eyes tracking my every move. After half an hour of wiping baseboards, I moved to the shelves. I took the box of unscented crayons and the ream of paper from my cart. I didn't offer them. I just set them on a low shelf, accessible but not pushed on him. I sat on the floor, a few feet away, and took a sheet of paper. "Shh!" I folded. I could hear his breathing. It was shallow, fast. "Shh!" A small sound escaped him, a low, nasal It wasn't a word. It was a vibration, the sound of a mind that was overwhelmed, finding one single thing to focus on. I finished the crane and placed it on the floor. I picked up another sheet. "Shh!" The sound of his breathing deepened. It slowed down, matching the rhythm of my hands. Inhale, crease. Exhale, fold. I folded 3 more cranes, lining them up in a row. I never looked at him. I just focused on the paper, pouring all my concentration into the simple, steady movements. When I was done, I stood up slowly, my joints cracking in the quiet. I turned to go back to my cleaning cart. He was right behind me. I froze. He had crawled across the thick rug, silent as smoke. He was on his hands and knees, staring up at me, his dark eyes wide and assessing. He wasn't coiled in terror, he was curious. "Hello, Theo," I whispered, not moving a muscle. He didn't answer. He just looked. His gaze drifted from my face, down my gray smock, to the one piece of me that didn't belong. My mother's silver dandelion pin, clipped to my collar. Slowly, his small, damp hand lifted. He reached out, his fingers uncurling. He wasn't reaching for me. He was reaching for the pin. His fingertip, impossibly soft, brushed the cold metal. It was the first gentle human contact he had initiated in months. I stayed perfectly still. I just breathed. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. He looked back at my face. He saw me. And in that moment, I wasn't a threat. I was just Ra, the person who made the paper sounds. He leaned forward, a clumsy, impulsive movement. He pressed his wet, open mouth against my cheek in a quick, chaste peck. Then, as if startled by his own bravery, he scrambled backward, picked up one of the paper cranes, and scurried back to his corner, his eyes never leaving me. My hand rose to my cheek. It was wet. A small sound, a sharp intake of breath, came from the doorway. Mrs. Prin was standing there, her hand over her heart, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. In the kitchen, Jack Sven, watching the monitor feed, went still, the kitchen staff bustling behind him, slowed to a stop, sensing the shift, all of them staring at the screen in dead silence. And in his dark, cedar-paneled study, Damien Rourke, watching the same feed, stood up so abruptly his chair nearly toppled over. He stared at the grainy image of his son, the child who recoiled from all human touch, willingly, instinctively, kissing the new night cleaner, his world, for a moment, tilted on its axis. "Mrs." Prin hurried over to me, her usual severity completely gone. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh, my dear." But her eyes kept darting toward the hallway, toward the master's study. The master... "We must be careful. This is unexpected." She was afraid of this, afraid of a good thing, because it changed the rules. Jack Sven's voice crackled over her walkie-talkie, sharp and official. "Prin, bring the new hire to the kitchen, now." When we arrived, Jax was waiting, and he was studying my file on a tablet, and he didn't look pleased, and he looked suspicious. "Run her background again," he said to an invisible subordinate. "Full financial. Check the brother's medical file. I want to know every doctor he's seen in the last 6 months." He looked at me. "Mister, Rourke has authorized an extension of your hours, effective immediately, full-time with benefits, and a wage increase of 30%. I blinked, the numbers scrambling in my head, that was enough for Rowan. That was enough. "But," Jax continued, his voice hard, "let's be very clear. You are not a nanny. That position is filled." He gestured to the terrified girl who was now hovering by the doorway. "Your custodial staff, your duties are the sanitation of the West Wing playroom and nursery. You are to be present. You are to clean. That is all. Do not overstep. Miss Quinn, do you understand me?" "Yes, Mr. Fenn." Damien was being clever. He wasn't making me a nanny. To call me that would be to put pressure on Theo, to replace the 12 failures that had come before. I was just the cleaning lady. I was furniture. I was safe. So I became the safest piece of furniture in Rookhaven? My duties were simple. I cleaned, I wiped, and I was a calm presence in the storm. I began to gently curate his environment. The room was too bright, the sounds too sharp. I put in a request through Mrs. Prin. Heavy curtains. Velvet, if possible, dark blue. The light is too harsh. They arrived the next day. The marble floors, I requested next. They echo. Are there any rugs, wool, or cotton? Something hand-woven. The texture is better. Rugs were brought up from storage, thick and soft, muffling the sound of footsteps, soaking up the echoes. I stopped using the harsh chemical cleaners. I switched to simple white vinegar and warm water. The sterile, biting smell of bleach was replaced by a faint, clean tang. And in the hallway, outside the room, I placed a small diffuser with 2 drops of sweet orange oil, not enough to be a scent, just enough to cut the sterile tension in the air. And Theo responded. The screaming fits that had lasted for hours now lasted for 10 minutes. The frantic head-banging stopped. He was still a volatile, sensitive child, but the panic was receding. He started to use my name, Ara, and he would point at me when I entered. Ara. He started to play, not with the expensive, loud toys, but with the paper. He would sit in his corner, tearing it, and he would mimic the sound I made when I folded, a little breathy noise. It was his new ritual, his sound for peace. I never saw Damien, but I felt him. I knew he was watching the monitors. I knew he was standing in the shadows of the hallway, just listening to the one thing he had never heard in this house, quiet. I would see his silhouette some nights, in his study, as I passed, just a shape against the rain-lashed glass. He was watching his son sleep, really, truly sleep. The entire house seemed to unclench. The scent of cedar from his study and the faint, sweet orange from the hall began to mingle. The air felt different. One night, or rather, one early morning, my shift was over. It was almost 5 a.m. The rain had finally stopped, and the first weak light of a black fall dawn was painting the sky gray. Theo was asleep in his bedroom. The door cracked open. I had cleaned the playroom, folded a small family of paper cranes, and left them on his play mat. I gathered my things, my footsteps silent on the new, thick rug. I let myself out of the playroom easing the heavy door shut with a quiet click. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it. Patter, patter, patter. Small, bare feet on the hardwood floor. I turned. The playroom door creaked open. Theo stood there, his hair a mess, his eyes half closed with sleep. He was holding something in his fist. He walked right up to me. He didn't crawl, he walked. He looked up at me, his face serious, and pushed his crumpled fist into my hand. "For Mommy," he mumbled, his voice thick and drowsy. He wasn't calling me that. He was 3. He was half asleep. He was associating the comfort, the paper cranes, the quiet, with the only word he knew for it. I opened my hand. It was a paper crane, a tiny, crumpled, clumsy one he had tried to fold himself. I heard a sound in the darkness at the end of the hall, by the stairs. Damien Rourke was standing there. He'd probably been on his way to his own bed. He was frozen, his hand on the banister. The word hung in the air between us, echoing louder than any scream. "Mommy!" He didn't look at me, just stared at his son, his face pale, his composure shattered. He looked like a man who had just been shot, the wind knocked out of him, utterly, completely, and silently undone. The piece I had built was a thin sheet of ice over a raging river, and in the 3rd week of my employment, the ice began to crack. The quiet I had curated for Theo was real, but it was contained within the walls of the nursery. Outside that room, the house was contracting, pulling in on itself with a new, sharp-edged anxiety. Damien Rourke was a ghost. I no longer saw him watching from the shadows. He was locked away in his study for hours, sometimes days, at a time. The few times I did see him, he looked ravaged, his glacial control worn thin, the shadows under his eyes darker than the Blackfall River at midnight. The house's silence was no longer calm. It was the held breath before a scream. The kitchen staff whispered. They talked about the nighttime transport, about shipments from the docks just vanishing. No violence, no noise, just gone. They talked about Kellen Sardo, a name that made them cross themselves, and how he was making a play for the North Lake routes. I kept my head down. I cleaned, I folded my cranes, I focused on Theo. He was thriving in our bubble. He was speaking more short, 2-word sentences. Ara, paper, bear sing, no light. He was learning to name his world, and in doing so, learning to control it. But he was, above all, a Rourke, and Rourkes are observant. I was in his bedroom, just before dawn, changing the sheets on his small bed. He was asleep, his breathing finally deep and even. Under his pillow, tucked away like a secret, I felt a small, hard-cornered book. It was a little spiral notebook, the kind you get at a drugstore for $1. I almost put it back, but my fingers recognized the texture. It wasn't just a book. I opened it. It wasn't a child's scribbles. It was a map. My blood chilled. It was drawn in black, unscented crayon, the kind I had brought. It was a series of dots and lines, a long, wavy line I recognized as the North Lake River, a cluster of squares for the Iron Bridge district, and then a series of precise, circled dots along the waterfront, Pier 4, Pier 7, the old rail spur. They weren't random, they were stops, a route. Theo had drawn a logistics map. My hands were shaking. I put the notebook back, my mind racing. Where had a 3-year-old seen this? I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, Damien came into the nursery. He hadn't been to see Theo in 2 days. He looked like he'd been through a war. His suit was rumpled, his tie was gone, and his jaw was covered in dark stubble. He just stood in the doorway, watching his son, who was quietly lining up paper cranes on the rug. "Theo," he said. His voice was rough. "Sandpaper on steel?" Theo looked up. "Papa?" Damien walked in, his heavy tread muffled by the thick wool rug. He sat on the floor, a move that looked unnatural for him, his knees cracking. He saw the notebook peeking out from under the pillow. He pulled it out. His entire body went rigid. It was not the reaction of a father finding a drawing. It was the reaction of a king finding an assassin's dagger in his own bed. He held the notebook open, his hand trembling. not with weakness, but with a terrible, contained rage. He looked at his son, and his voice, when he spoke, was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It was infinitely gentle. "Theo, who showed you this? Who showed you the dots?" I held my breath. I was just the cleaning lady, invisible in the corner, wiping down a bookshelf. Theo didn't seem to notice the danger. He just pointed a small finger across the room. "Bear. Bear sings me dots." Damien's eyes followed that finger to a soft, plush, beige-colored bear sitting on the nightstand. It had been a gift from a distant relative. "Mrs." Prin had said for white noise relaxation. It was always on, a quiet, shushing sound. Damien stood up. He picked up the bear. He looked at me, and his eyes were no longer gray. They were black. "Get Jax!" 5 minutes later, we were in the main kitchen. The morning sun streamed in, making the stainless steel counters gleam. Jax Fenn had the bear. He didn't ask questions. He took a long, sharp utility knife from his belt and, with the precision of a surgeon, sliced the bear open from neck to navel. He plunged his hand into the cotton stuffing. His fingers closed around something small and hard. He pulled it out. It was a small, black chip, no bigger than my fingernail, attached to a wafer-thin microphone. "A ghost pin," Jax breathed, his face pale with fury. "This isn't off the shelf. This is high grade, military. This is expensive." He looked at Damien. "This was placed by someone on the inside, someone who could get into his room." Damien Rourke said nothing. He just stared at the piece of technology that had been listening to his son, that had been leaking his secrets. The new procedures from the North Lake Maritime Commission, the ones that were choking his transport lines, they knew exactly where to squeeze. Sardo's men knew exactly where to be, because a child's teddy bear had told them. The house was no longer a fortress. It was a sieve. That night, the atmosphere was suffocating. It was the night of the Rourke family's monthly charity board dinner. A formality. Mrs. Prin had told me. I was assigned to serve water in clear plates, to be a ghost in the dining room. They were all there. Damien, at the head of the table, looking like a statue carved from ice. Maya Corin, his advisor, at his right, her face sharp and her eyes missing nothing. Jack stood by the door, arms crossed, his presence a physical weight. And at the other end of the table, holding a wine glass, was Benedict Cole. He was the chief accountant, the man who ran the Morning Ember Charitable Fund. He was handsome, in a polished, bloodless way, with perfect hair and a suit that probably cost $5,000. He was the public face of the Rourke organization's goodwill. "The BCI is just persistent," Benedict was saying, his voice a smooth, reasonable balm. "These audits are tiresome, Damien, but I assure you, Morning Ember is transparent. Our books are clean." "They have an inside source," Maya said, her voice cutting through his. "Someone in our accounting—" Benedict raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "Then you should find them, Maya. But this atmosphere is unsettling." He turned his gaze to Jax. "Speaking of unsettling, I hear there was a security lapse in Theo's room." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "A toy," Benedict said, swirling his wine. "A listening device. In the boy's own room. How does that happen? Jax, your security is supposed to be absolute. You're responsible for that failure." Jax didn't flinch. "It's being handled." "Is it?" Benedict smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Or are you too busy watching the docks, letting the real threats walk in the front door?" I moved forward to refill Damien's water. I was invisible. And because I was invisible, I saw everything. I saw Benedict's left eyelid twitch. Just once. A tiny, fractional spasm. When Maya said BCI audit, I saw Mrs. Prin, who was holding a tray of bread, deliberately angle her body away from Benedict. She wouldn't look at him. Not once. Her hands, holding the silver tray, were shaking so hard the bread was rattling. She wasn't afraid of Damien. She was terrified of the accountant. Damien placed his fork down. The click of metal on porcelain was as loud as a gunshot. "Jax," he said, his voice lethally quiet. "Lock down all digital assets. I want a full audit of every transaction Benedict has made for the last year. Maya, I want a decoy, a super profit shipment, something our leech can't possibly resist. We are going to bleed him out." The dinner ended. I spent the next 2 hours in a daze, cleaning the East Wing, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that Benedict Cole was the traitor, but I was the maid. It was almost 3 in the morning. I was in the administrative hallway, emptying the last trash bin outside the accounting offices. The hall was dark, lit only by a single green exit sign. I heard a sound, a whisper. I froze. A door was cracked open, Benedict Cole's office. He was inside, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "No, the manifest will be clean. It's too good to pass up. I'm feeding it to them tonight." He paused, listening. "Make sure Sardo's people are clean. Tomorrow night, Bay 7, the Midnight Cat. It has to be that one. It's the only one they'll move for." My blood turned to ice. Bay 7, the Midnight Cat. He was setting up the bait or walking into it. No, he was directing it. I backed away, silent as a shadow, my mop bucket rattling faintly. I fled the East Wing. I had to get out. I couldn't carry this. I was a cleaner. My brother was sick. This was not my world. I was in the grand hallway, the one that separated the 2 wings, my hand on the handle of the service door. I was running. "Miss Quinn." Damien's voice. He was standing at the foot of the grand staircase, in the shadows. He'd been waiting. I turned, my heart trying to escape my chest. I was trembling. I was caught. He didn't move, just watched me, his gray eyes reading my terror. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. The man I saw now was not the same one who had warned me away from the West Wing weeks ago. This was the man who had seen his son kiss me, the man who had seen his son hand me a crumpled paper crane. "You look frightened," he said, his voice a low rumble. I'm just tired, Mr. Rourke. It's the end of my shift." He took a step closer. The air around him was electric. "You have done a good thing. For my son. You brought him back from a place I couldn't reach." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "In this house," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "trust is a weapon. It's the rarest thing I own, and it's been compromised." He was standing in front of me now, and he was so close I could smell the faint scent of cedar and the sharp, metallic tang of stress. "If you see anything," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, holding me captive, "anything at all about my son or about the nature of trust in this house, you don't go to Mrs. Prynne. You don't go to Jax." He paused, and the weight of his next words settled on me like a shroud. "You come to me first." It was a command, wrapped in a plea. He had just made me his confidant. He had just made me a player in his lethal game, and I was standing there, my hand burning on the doorknob, holding the secret that could either save him or get us all killed. I didn't tell him. The words Bay 7, Midnight Cat were a lead weight in my stomach. For 2 nights, I walked the halls of Rookhaven as a ghost, my silence a living, breathing thing. I had been a cleaner, invisible. Then I became a healer, a curiosity. Now, Damien's command, "You come to me," had made me a spy, and I was failing. Every time I saw Benedict Cole in the hallways, his polished smile and courteous nod made my skin crawl. He was the leak. He was the rot in the foundation. And I was the only one who knew, and I was just cleaning. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that my only focus was Rowan. But as I watched Theo laugh, a real, bubbling laugh as we built a tower of paper cranes, I knew I was lying. You can't just heal a child. You have to heal the house he lives in. On the 3rd night, the tension in the house had become a physical ache. Damien was pushing his decoy shipment, and Benedict was preparing his ambush. The entire estate was a bomb waiting for a spark. Mrs. Prynne found me as I was wiping down the playroom. Her face was pale. "Miss Quinn, Mr. Rourke requests your presence." And Theo's, "He's on the roof." The roof wasn't a roof. It was a world, a massive glass atrium, a greenhouse built against the harsh Midwestern sky. The air inside was warm, thick, and humid, smelling of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The rain hammered against the glass panes above, a roaring drum, but in here, it was peaceful. And it was filled with olive trees, dozens of them in huge terracotta pots. Damien was standing by the largest one, not in a suit, but in a simple black Henley and dark pants. He looked younger and somehow more dangerous. "Theo is afraid of the rain," he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the sound. "I thought he might like to see it from a safe place." Theo, holding my hand, stared at the glass ceiling, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with wonder. "They're olive trees," I said, touching a silver-green leaf. "My grandfather planted the first one," Damien said. He ran a hand over the rough bark, a promise of peace, an idea I found difficult to maintain. He watched as Theo, growing brave, let go of my hand and toddled over to a small, brightly colored watering can. He picked it up, mimicking the gardeners he must have seen. "I teach him to count with the watering," I found myself explaining. I guided Theo to a smaller tree. "Okay, buddy, let's count. 1, 2, 3. Theo tipped the can, a tiny stream of water darkening the soil. "Tree," he whispered, proud. I looked up and met Damien's gaze. He was watching us, his expression unguarded, and it was devastating. It was a raw, aching loneliness. He wasn't the kingpin, he wasn't the master. He was just a man, watching a simple, domestic moment. A picture of a family he had never thought he could be a part of. He looked away quickly, as if I'd caught him in a crime. Just then, a train whistle shrieked from the Iron Bridge district far below. It cut through the atrium, a blade of sound. Theo dropped the can, his small body locking up. His hands flew to his ears, his face crumpling. It was the prelude, the sharp intake of breath before the sensory storm. I should take him," Damien started, his old helplessness returning, his hands fisting at his sides. "No," I said, not sharply, but firmly. I knelt, getting on Theo's level. "Hey, Theo, look at me. It's just a sound. We're safe." His eyes were squeezed shut, his breath hitching. "We're going to build a box. Remember, right here." I put my hand on his small back. In 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Pause 2, 3, 4. He was still trembling, but his lungs tried to obey. I felt a sudden warmth, a presence at my other side. Damien had knelt, his expensive pants pressing into the damp soil. He mirrored my action, placing his large, tense hand on Theo's other shoulder. In 2, 3, 4, he rumbled, his voice low and uncertain, finding my rhythm. Hold, son, 2, 3, 4. We were a circle, all three of us, breathing in unison. As Theo's frantic trembling began to subside, Damien's arm moved. It didn't just stay on Theo. It came around both of us, pulling us in, a desperate anchoring gesture. He wasn't just comforting his son. He was holding on to us like we were the only solid things in a collapsing world. The rain hammered the glass, the smell of damp earth, jasmine, and the sharp, clean scent of him, cedar and ozone, filled my lungs. My cheek was pressed against the rough fabric of his shirt. I could feel his heart hammering against my shoulder, a frantic, powerful rhythm that slowly began to match our breathing. We stayed like that for a long time, long after Theo's breathing had evened out and his head had drooped, asleep, against my chest. Finally, Damien let go, his arm sliding away, but his hand lingered on my shoulder, his skin warm. He looked wrecked. "How?" His voice was rough. "How do you always know what to do?" I stayed on the floor, holding his sleeping son. "My brother, Rowan, I told you he fell." The words came tumbling out, the story I'd kept locked away. It was a non-union job, bad scaffolding. He fell 3 stories. It wasn't just broken bones, it was his spine, nerve damage. The doctors, they use words I can't understand. He has panic attacks now. Bad ones, the sound of a truck braking, a dish dropping, it sends him right back to the fall. I learned to be his anchor. I learned to build the box. I looked at him, the truth bare between us. That's why I'm here. Mr. Rourke. That's why I took the job. He needs a neurosurgery that costs more than I'll make in 10 years. He went rigid, the warmth disappearing, the master snapping back into place. Which hospital? St. Jude's, downtown. I'll make a call, he said, standing up, pulling his phone out. I'll have the best specialist from the East Coast flown in. He'll be in surgery by the end of the week. It will be handled. Handled like a problem, like a shipment, like a traitor. I stood up slowly, cradling Theo. My stomach turned. This was it, the golden cage. No. He froze, his phone halfway to his ear. What? No, I said again, my voice stronger. Thank you, but I can't accept that. He looked at me as if I'd grown a second head. I am offering to save your brother's life. This is not a request. And I am respectfully declining, I said, my heart hammering. You're offering a favor, Mr. Rourke, an unclear transaction. And in this house, I've seen what favors cost. I can't be in your debt. Not like that. I needed to stand on my own. If I was bought, I was just another one of his possessions. If I was bought, I had no right to judge Benedict. I will earn the money. For Rowan, the right way. I had expected rage. I had expected him to fire me. Instead, he just stared. He stared at me for a full minute, his gray eyes searching my face, seeing something he couldn't categorize. Finally, he nodded. A single, sharp dip of his chin. You are, he said, his voice quiet, singular Alara Quinn. He left me there, with his son in my arms and the rain as my only applause. The next day, he found me again. He led me not to the roof, but to the deep basement, to a long, climate-controlled room I never knew existed, an archery range. It was pristine, not for firearms, but for old-world recurve bows. I thought you might need a way to clear your head, he said. He handed me a light, beautifully crafted bow. It's about focus. Nothing else exists. The house, the threats, your personal worries, they all have to fade. There is only you, the string, and the target. I was clumsy. The string snapped against my forearm, leaving an instant, stinging welt. I cursed under my breath. You're fighting it, he said. You're trying to force it. He stepped behind me. I stopped breathing. His chest was pressed against my back. I could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against my shoulder blades. He wasn't touching me. Not really, but he was everywhere. Relax your shoulder, he murmured, his voice a low vibration in my ear. He reached around, his hand covering mine on the bow's grip. His skin was warm, his grip firm. His other hand came to my right elbow, guiding my arm back. Don't aim with your eyes, aim with your breath. His face was next to mine. I could feel his breath, warm and clean, ghosting my temple. Pull, he whispered. I pulled the string back. Now breathe, with me. In 2, 3, 4. We inhaled together. The air was charged, electric. This was more intimate than the hug in the greenhouse. That was desperation. This was control. This was a shared, focused, dangerous alignment. Hold. My muscles screamed. The world narrowed to that single point. The yellow center of the target 50 feet away. Exhale, he breathed. I let the arrow fly. It thwacked into the target, striking the outer red ring. I let out the breath I'd been holding, my whole body trembling. The spark between us was undeniable, a jolt of static electricity that left my skin tingling. I stepped away, fast, putting a foot of air between us. I think I get it. He stepped back, too, clearing his throat. The boundary was respected, but we both knew we had just burned it to the ground. You're a fast learner, he said, his voice a fraction rougher than before. That night, as I was leaving my shift, my head spinning from the archery and the memory of his breath on my skin, Mrs. Prin stopped me. She pressed something cold and heavy into my palm. It was an antique silver pocket watch, ornate. the cover engraved with a single, delicate rose. "This was hers," Mrs. Prynne whispered, her eyes shining. "The late Mrs. Rourke. She always said this house was a beautiful, perfect machine, a clock without a heartbeat." She closed my fingers over the watch. "You. My dear, you're making this place have a heartbeat again." I went home to my cold, single-room apartment. I held the watch in one hand and my mother's dandelion pin in the other. I couldn't be his charity case, but I couldn't let Benedict destroy the man who was learning to breathe with his son. I had to tell him about the midnight cat. I sat down and wrote a note, just for myself, on the back of a grocery receipt. Trust isn't being blind. It's knowing all the risks and choosing to stay anyway. I went back to Rookhaven that evening, my resolve set. I would tell him. I went straight to the greenhouse, the one place that felt like ours. I needed a minute to breathe, to find the words. The olive trees were silent witnesses. I stood in the spot where we had knelt, the three of us. My eyes drifted up, following the lines of the steel beams to the glass apex. And I saw it. Nestled in the dark metal fretwork, almost invisible, was a small black dot, a camera lens. It wasn't one of the bulky, obvious security cameras. This was small, high grade. As I watched, it panned, slowly, almost imperceptibly, to follow me. The sanctuary wasn't safe. The watcher was still watching. I saw the camera. My blood didn't just run cold, it evaporated. I felt dizzy, my hand gripping the rough bark of an olive tree, the greenhouse, the one place that felt like a sanctuary. Our place was compromised, that tiny, panning lens. It wasn't one of Damien's bulky security feeds. It was hidden. It was sophisticated. It was Benedict. I fled the roof, my mind racing. I couldn't tell Damien, not directly. I couldn't be seen walking into his study. What if the camera wasn't Benedict's? What if it was Damien's, and he was testing me? No, that didn't feel right. The man who had knelt with me, who had breathed with me, wasn't the man who would bug his own son's safe space. I had to get the information to him. Midnight cat, Bay 7. I went to the playroom. Theo was asleep. I found the crane he had given me, the one he'd crumpled in his fist. For Mommy, my hands were shaking. I smoothed it out and, using one of his unscented black crayons, I wrote the words on the paper wing, Midnight cat, Bay 7. I took out my cheap, prepaid phone. I took a picture of the crane. My fingers were slick with nervous sweat as I sent the image to the only number I had for this house, Mrs. Prynne's. I added a simple message. Please show this to Mr. Rourke immediately. It is about the leak. He will understand. Trust me. I pressed send. My heart was a trapped bird. I had just picked a side. The next 24 hours were a silent, screaming hell. The house was humming with a terrible, repressed energy. Damien was gone. Jax was gone. Maya Corin was a blur of sharp suits and clicking heels. Her face grim. The decoy shipment, the medical components, was in play. I was on shift, but I wasn't cleaning. I was a guardian. I was in the playroom with Theo, and I had locked the door outside. The storm that had been threatening for days finally broke over Blackfall. This wasn't a drizzle. It was a biblical deluge, the wind howling like a living thing, the rain hitting the reinforced windows like handfuls of gravel. I didn't know what was happening at the docks. I didn't know that Sarto's men, disguised with fake relief effort patches, had shown up 2 hours early. I didn't know that the North Lake Maritime Commission had waved them through, a blatant act of complicity. I didn't know that Damien and Jax, hidden in the shadows, were watching it all unfold. All I knew was the tension and the storm. At 2:17 in the morning, the lights in the playroom flickered, they buzzed, went out, and then snapped back on. Theo looked up from his blocks, his eyes wide. Then the lights went out for good. A sudden, suffocating blackness. The house was dead. The emergency generators kicked in a second later, but they only lit the main hallways, casting a dim, hellish red glow. The humming of the servers, the air filtration, the security grid all silent. Theo didn't whimper. He screamed. It was the old sound. The sound of pure, sensory terror. The dark, the silence, the sudden change. "I've got you," I said, my voice shaking as I scooped him out of the dark. "I've got you. We're okay. It's just the storm." I ran to the door, fumbling with the lock. I ripped it open and ran into the red-lit hallway. Mrs. Prin met me at the landing, her face a white mask in the emergency light. She was holding a heavy flashlight. "The main power is cut," she said, her voice trembling. "The phone lines are dead. The whole grid is down." "The quiet room," I said, my mind racing. "The one in the basement, the one lined with cork. It's soundproof. He'll be safe there." I had found it during my first week deep clean. We were halfway down the grand staircase when the noise started. A heavy, rhythmic boom, boom, boom. Someone was using a battering ram on the front doors. "Mrs. Prin stifled a scream. She ran to the main security panel by the door, which was running on a tiny battery backup. The screen flickered to life. 6 men, dressed in dark blue rain slickers, with BCI in white letters on the back. They were coming through the shattered remains of the oak doors. "I am Mrs. Prin, the estate manager," she shouted into the intercom, her voice cracking. "You cannot be here. I demand to see a warrant." One of the men, his face hidden by a hood, stepped forward and flashed a laminated ID at the camera. "Bureau of Citywide Integrity. Official warrant." My blood turned to ice. It was wrong. "Mrs. Prin," I hissed, pulling her arm. "Look at the ID. The font." She squinted at the screen. "It's fake," I said, my voice desperate. "The official BCI font is a serif, like a typewriter. I've seen it on the notices downtown. That's a block font. It's fake. It's him. It's Benedict." The recognition hit her like a physical blow. She understood. This wasn't a raid. It was an invasion. "The silver pantry," I said, yanking her away from the panel. "Now." I half-dragged, half-carried Theo, running through the dark dining room. I had polished the silver in that pantry for an entire shift. I knew its secrets. I threw open the door, past the gleaming rows of sterling, and shoved my shoulder against the back wall, the one carved from heavy mahogany. A panel groaned and gave way, revealing a dark, cobweb-filled shaft, the old dumbwaiter. "In," I shoved Mrs. "Prin, it goes down to the terrace, go." She scrambled in, and I pushed Theo into her arms before climbing in after her, pulling the panel shut just as we heard the heavy thud of boots on the marble floor of the dining room. We tumbled out onto the stone terrace. The storm hit us like a physical punch. The wind tore the breath from my lungs, and the rain was so thick I couldn't see 10 feet. "They're spreading out," a man's voice shouted from inside. Flashlight beams cut through the rain. They were fanning out, covering the grounds. "This way," I pulled Mrs. Prin, who was sobbing, toward the cover of the great dark trees. Theo was buried against my chest, his small body rigid with a silent terror. We ran. We slipped on wet grass and mud. A beam of light swung toward us. I shoved Mrs. Prin behind a statue. We were exposed. My eyes darted, searching for anything. The pergola, the heavy metal wind chimes Damien's mother had installed. They were clanging. A deep, chaotic bong clang in the wind. I grabbed a loose piece of gravel from the path and, with all my strength, hurled it at the chimes. It hit with a deafening gong. "Over there," a voice yelled. "By the pergola," I heard them. The flashlight beams swung away. It bought us 5 seconds. "Run!" I screamed over the wind, down the hill toward the lake. We scrambled down the muddy slope, clutching at roots and bushes. That's when I heard it. The sound of a car, tires screeching on the wet gravel of the main drive. A black sedan, Damien's car, slid to a stop. He was back. He must have left the docks. He got out, his face a mask of black rage, and saw the open pantry door. The trail of mud on the pristine stone. I've heard men shout in anger. I've heard them shout in pain. But I had never heard this. He didn't yell for security. He didn't yell for Jax. "Theo." It was a roar, torn from his soul, a sound of primal panic. He saw the open grounds, the men fanning out, and he thought his son had been taken. "We're here!" I shrieked, but the wind stole my voice. We were at the bottom of the hill, the boathouse. The long wooden dock stretched out into the black, churning water. We ran onto it, the waves splashing over our feet. We were trapped. End of the line, Ilara. The voice was calm, cultured. A bright flashlight beam blinded me. Benedict Cole stepped out from the shadows of the boathouse. His $5,000 suit was soaked, his perfect hair plastered to his skull. The mask of the polite accountant was gone, replaced by a look of bored annoyance. He held a small, black firearm, and he held it with confidence. "I have to admit, I'm impressed," he said, walking toward us. "You did what 12 nannies couldn't. You made the boy coherent. You made him valuable." He gestured with the weapon. "Give him to me." "No," I whispered, shielding Theo. "This isn't a negotiation," Benedict sneered. "I just need the leverage. Sarto's a brute, but he's predictable. I just need a little insurance." "Drop it, Benedict." Damien. He was at the top of the ramp, his own weapon raised, gleaming in the rain. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He was alone. Benedict just laughed, a high, thin sound that cut through the storm. "You failed, Damien. The plan was perfect, but your man Sarto got greedy. His professionals were too good. They got the decoy drive, but your man Jax got in the way, shrapnel from the container lock. And you had to choose." He took a step closer to me, his eyes glittering. "You chose the broken soldier over the prize. You let them get away. All that posturing, and you're still soft." "Let them go," Damien said, his voice a low growl, his weapon unwavering. "Oh, I don't think so," Benedict said. He pulled a small radio from his pocket. He clicked the button. A voice crackled through the speaker, thick with static and a heavy Northlake accent. It was Sarto. "Rourke, glad you could join us. Your man Jax is going to live. Unfortunate, but I have your accountant's little prize. He tells me it's not the real one, just a decoy." The radio crackled. Benedict smiled. "So, here's the deal, Rourke," Sarto's voice rasped. "You bring me the real storage drive, the one you keep in your father's safe. The boy for the drive. A simple trade." The wind on the dock was a living thing, trying to tear us apart. Sarto's voice, a metallic rasp over the radio, was an ultimatum. Benedict was laughing, his face a mask of triumph in the rain. "No," Damien said. The word was final, absolute. He would not trade his son. "Wrong answer, Damien," Benedict screamed over the wind, his voice high and cracking. "Sarto will just take him, or I will." He raised his firearm, and my blood froze. He wasn't aiming at Damien. He was aiming at me, and at the small boy I was shielding. "Wait!" I shouted. My voice was ripped away by the storm. I had to think. This wasn't just about money. I saw it at the dinner. Benedict was a man drowning in his own perceived inadequacy. He didn't want the prize. He wanted the win. He wanted the control. "What do you really want, Benedict?" I yelled, trying to make my voice cut through the deluge. "I want what's mine. I want the respect," he shrieked, agitated. "Sarto isn't giving you respect," I countered, taking a small, trembling step forward. "He's using you. You're the numbers guy. He'll take the drive and he will get rid of you. You know that. You're smarter than this." "Shut up, you're just the maid." "I am," I screamed, "and I know where the real vault is, not the one Sarto knows about, the old one, the one I found when I was cleaning the wine cellar." I was lying, praying he couldn't see it. "Let them go. I'll take you there. You'll have the one thing Damien Rourke can't protect. You'll have everything." He hesitated. His weapon wavered. He wanted to believe me. Damien's eyes were wide, a silent no forming on his lips. Before Benedict could speak, a sharp thump exploded from the woods above the ramp. A canister landed at Benedict's feet, spewing a thick gray cloud, smoke. Now Jax's voice roared from the darkness. Damien didn't hesitate. He lunged, not at Benedict, but at us. He snatched Theo from my arms with one hand, grabbed my wrist with the other, and hauled me toward the boathouse. "Cover him, Jax." "Go," Jax yelled, and I heard the crack of a return shot from the trees. Damien kicked the boathouse door in. It was pitch black, smelling of mildew and old ropes. "Where?" "Ilara," he shouted. He thought my lie about the vault was real. I don't know," I cried. "I made it up." "Damn it." He shoved Theo back into my arms, pressing us against the wall as he ran his hands along the wood paneling. "My grandfather, he built this place for war." His fingers found a seam. He slammed his palm against it. A narrow, dark section of the wall clicked and slid open. A tunnel. "In, go?" He shoved me and Theo through. I stumbled onto a cold stone floor. He followed, pulling the heavy door shut behind us. We were in absolute, suffocating darkness. The sound of the storm was instantly gone. I couldn't breathe. Theo was preternaturally silent, frozen in shock. Then, Damien's hand found mine in the dark. His grip was steel, an anchor. "I have you. It goes up, to the house. Run." We ran, a narrow, winding staircase of stone. I could hear his harsh, ragged breathing behind me. I could feel his pulse, or maybe it was mine, thrumming through our joined hands, our hearts beating in the same frantic, terrified rhythm. He shoved open a final panel, and we fell into a room. It was silent. It was warm. The walls were lined with thick, dark cork and rich mahogany. A single low-voltage lamp glowed on a desk, a panic room. Damien slammed the steel cord door and threw a deadbolt that sounded like a bank vault closing. The world outside ceased to exist. Theo, his small body having absorbed all the terror it could hold, finally let go. He went limp in my arms, his breath catching in a single, exhausted sob before he fell into a deep, comatose-like sleep. I sank onto a low leather sofa, my arms still locked around him, and began to shake. The adrenaline vanished, leaving a cold, violent vacuum. My teeth chattered, my whole body convulsed. The image of Benedict's weapon, the sound of Sarto's voice, the blackness of the tunnel, it all hit me at once. Damien stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his dark hair slick with rain. He watched me, his face grim. He knelt in front of me. He didn't speak. He reached out and covered my trembling hands with his own. His skin was hot, his grip was solid, pressing down, forcing reality back into me. He just held me, his thumbs rubbing small circles on my knuckles, grounding me. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice raw. "He's safe. You saved him. Ilara." I looked up. His face was inches from mine. The glacial gray eyes weren't cold. They were burning. The gratitude in them was so naked, so profound, it stole my breath. We stayed like that, just breathing in the silence. We had survived, the three of us. The shaking in my hands slowed, but the tremor moved deeper, into my chest. He didn't let go. He moved one hand slowly, lifting it to my face. His thumb, rough and calloused, brushed the rain and mud from my cheek. "You lied," he whispered, his voice thick with awe. I had to," I stammered. "He was going to—" "You were willing to trade yourself." It wasn't a question. His gaze dropped to my lips. My heart didn't just beat, it ached. He didn't move. He was waiting, giving me every second to pull away, to say no. He was listening, not just with his ears, but with his whole body. I didn't pull away. I leaned into his touch, a fraction of an inch. It was all the consent he needed. He closed the distance. He kissed me. It was not a gentle exploration. It was a collision. It was every ounce of adrenaline, every second of terror, every night of watching, and all the desperate, terrible relief pouring into one single point of contact. His lips were firm, demanding, and yet impossibly respectful. His hand that had been on my cheek slid, fingers tangling in my damp hair, cupping the back of my head. His other hand held my shoulder, holding me steady. It was a kiss that said, "You're alive, and thank God you're alive, and you are here." My body, coiled tight with fear for hours, went liquid, My shoulders relaxed, and I leaned into his unyielding strength. In this room, I wasn't the maid, and he wasn't the boss. We were just two people who had almost lost everything. My hands, no longer shaking, came up. I didn't push him away. I clutched the front of his wet Henley, my fingers twisting in the fabric. I tilted my head, meeting his kiss, returning the pressure. My fingers slid up from his chest, over his broad shoulders, and buried themselves in the thick, rain-soaked hair at the nape of his neck. The kiss changed, the desperation gentled. It slowed, deepened, becoming a deliberate, searching promise in the dark. It was the scent of cedar and rain and the metallic tang of adrenaline, and it was the safest I had ever felt. A small sound, a whimper. We tore apart, our breathing harsh and loud in the quiet room. We looked at Theo. He was still fast asleep, his face peaceful, just a small sound in a deep dream. Damien rested his forehead against mine, his eyes squeezed shut. "I'm sorry," he breathed, his voice rough. I shouldn't have. Not now. It was a moment of weakness. I pulled back just enough to see his face. He looked ashamed. I raised my hand, the one that had been in his hair, and gently pressed my fingers to his lips, silencing him. "We are alive," I said, my voice firm, "and we both know why." A small red light on a control panel by the door began to blink. Damien was on his feet in an instant, the moment shattered, the king back in his armor. He crossed to the panel and hit a button. It was a silent comm. Maya's voice, tinny and strained, filled the room. "Damien, thank God. The signal from your ring is active. The BCI team, they're gone. They pulled back the second they lost Benedict's signal. They're retreating." "They didn't get what they came for," Damien said, his voice hard. "Worse?" Maya replied. "The Midnight Cat just left the pier. Sardo is moving. He just put out the call to the other families. He wants to settle the account tonight. He's moving the meet. The Grey Wharf night fair." "The fair," Damien spat. "In public, crowds. He's smart." He ran a hand through his hair, his mind already 3 steps ahead. He turned to me, his face set. "Alara, you and Theo will stay here. This room is impenetrable. It has air and water for a week. You will not open this door until I come for you." I stood up, carefully laying the sleeping Theo on the sofa cushions. "No." He looked at me, exasperated. "This is not a negotiation. You are safe here." "For how long?" I argued, walking toward him. "Until Sardo or Benedict finds a way to cut through 6 inches of steel. You taught me about focus. You taught me about the target." I stopped in front of him. "The only way we are safe is when this is finished. I was there. I heard them. I'm a part of this. Finishing it fast, that is safety." He stared at me, his jaw working. He saw the same unbending resolve in my eyes that he saw in the mirror. He gave a single, sharp nod. He reached for his left hand. He twisted a thick, heavy silver ring from his pinky finger. It was ancient, scarred, with a crest carved into the flat surface, a signet ring. He grabbed my hand and pressed it into my palm. It was still warm from his skin. "This," he said, his voice low and serious, "is the Rourke crest. If I don't come back, you find Maya, you give this to her. It's the key to the real data vault. It's everything." I looked at the heavy ring. Then I looked at his face. I reached up to the collar of my gray smock and unfastened my mother's silver pin, the dandelion. "In exchange," I said, "for a promise." I pressed the small pin into his large, calloused palm. "We both come back. You bring this back to me. You promise me, Damien." His fingers closed around the delicate pin, his gray eyes locked on mine. "I promise." The steel door hissed open. Jack stumbled in. His face was a mess. A bloody bandage was wrapped hastily around his head. His suit was torn, but he was grinning, a painful, grim smile. He looked at the heavy ring in my hand. He looked at the tiny silver pin in Damien's. "Well," Jax rasped, wiping a trickle of blood from his eyebrow. "Congratulations! I think you two just got engaged using a bunch of antiques." Damien ignored him. He looked at me, then at his sleeping son. His face hardened. He helped Jax stand upright. "Are you good?" "I'm good, boss, just a graze." Damien turned to me. He held out his hand. I took it. He pulled the heavy steel door open. The sound of the wind and the rain rushed back in, a cold, violent welcome. We stepped out into the storm, together. We didn't run back to the house. We ran into the storm. Jax leading the way, his hand pressed to the bleeding bandage on his head. He took us to the garage, past the rows of black, silent cars, to a steel door I had always assumed was a utility closet. It opened into a concrete bunker, a humming nexus of servers and screens, the real heart of Rookhaven. Maya Corrin was already there, her face illuminated by the glow of 6 monitors. She didn't look up. "Jax, there's a medical kit on the wall. Damien, Sarto just made his move." While Jax ripped open sterile packaging, hissing as he applied antiseptic, Damien moved to stand behind her, his hand, the one still holding my dandelion pin, clenched at his side. I stayed in the doorway, holding Theo, who had burrowed into my neck, his small body a lead weight. "He's at the Grey Wharf Night Fair," Maya said, her fingers flying across a keyboard. She pointed to a grainy, live feed. "He's not just meeting us, he's throwing a party." On the screen, I saw the chaos of the fair neon lights, spinning rides, and a large, brightly lit stall on the main pier. "He's leveraging our own assets," Maya said, her voice dripping with clinical rage. "He's using the Morning Ember Fund, the charity account Benedict was supposed to be managing. He set up a gala donation event." She zoomed in on a banner hanging over the stall. My blood ran cold. It was a picture of the official city seal, the Morning Ember Fund, in partnership with the Bureau of Citywide Integrity. "The BCI is not sponsoring a dockside carnival," Damien stated, his voice flat. "Of course not," Maya said. "It's Benedict's masterpiece. He's created a perfect fiction. The BCI isn't raiding him, they're protecting him. He's hired a dozen actors, dressed them as agents. The commissioner he's got greeting people. He's a third-string actor from the Blackfall Repertory Theater. Benedict is planning to auction the fake drive to Sarto in plain sight, wash the payoff as a charitable donation, and walk away clean, all under the protection of his own imaginary army." Damien was silent, absorbing the sheer audacity of the betrayal. I was watching the stall, watching the decorations. My heart, which I thought couldn't sink any lower, dropped into my stomach. "Damien," I whispered. He turned to me, his focus absolute. "The decorations," I said, my voice shaking. "Look at the stall. They're hanging from the rafters." He looked, and I saw his shoulders tense. They were paper cranes. Hundreds of them, strung up like Christmas lights, twisting in the damp river wind. They were white, blue, yellow, every color I had used in the nursery. The camera, the hidden lens in the greenhouse, the one in the playroom. Benedict hadn't just been watching for security codes or safe locations. He had been studying me. He had been studying Theo. He saw what calmed him. He saw the power of the paper, the rhythm of the folds. He wasn't just planning to take Theo as leverage. He was planning to manage him, to replace me, to use my own methods to soothe the child he was stealing. He was going to use them to keep him quiet, I stammered, horrified. Damien's face, when he turned from the screen, was no longer human. It was something carved from iron and vengeance. The violation went deeper than money, deeper than loyalty. Benedict had tried to steal his son's mind. "Maya," Damien said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "get me the Lake Meridian Task Force, the real ones." Maya looked up, shocked. "The LMT, Damien, if we bring them in, we expose everything. They'll gut us." "They want Sarto," Damien said. "They want the corruption on the North Lake Commission. Benedict just wrapped it all in a bow for them. We're going to leak the data. Everything on the fake BCI, the actor's name, the offshore accounts for Morning Ember. We're not just stopping Benedict. We're burning the entire nighttime operation to the ground, tonight." He looked at me. "This ends." Jax finished taping the bandage to his head. He came over, his face pale but his eyes clear. He held out a thin, metal bracelet, like a piece of minimalist jewelry. "I can't have you unprotected," Jack said. "It's a panic beacon, a ghost pin, just like the one he used in the bear. Ours is better." Damien took it from him. He grabbed my wrist, his skin still hot. His touch sent a jolt straight up my arm. "Here," he said, his voice low, his thumb pressing a small, invisible seam on the metal. "You press it twice, hard. It sends a high-frequency ping that only our system can read. If you're separated from me, if anyone touches you, you hit it." "I will," I promised. He slid it onto my wrist, and the cold metal felt as heavy as a shackle. The Grey Wharf night fair was a special kind of hell. The air was thick with the smell of fried dough, damp wool, and the metallic tang of the river. The roar of the crowd, the shrieks from the rides, the pounding, distorted music, it was a sensory nightmare. The storm hadn't hit here yet, but the sky was a bruised, sickly yellow, and the wind was picking up. We were a bizarre island in the stream of people. Damien walked in front of me, Theo awake now, his face buried in his father's shoulder. I walked close behind, my hand on Theo's back. Jax and Maya flanked us, invisible, their eyes scanning every face in the crowd. We reached the pier. Sardo was there, standing by the ridiculous crane-covered charity stall. He wasn't the gravel-voiced monster from the radio. He was a small, round man in a cheap suit, a greasy smile plastered on his face. He was wearing a plastic carnival mask, a bright blue bird. "Damien, my friend," he boomed, spreading his arms. "So glad you could make it to the party." He held up a small, black, hard-sided box. The drive, as discussed, a little damp from our adventure, but all here. Damien didn't move. "Where is he?" "Benedict O. He's the man of the hour. He's preparing the grand auction, a true showman." Sarto's eyes, tiny and sharp behind the mask, flicked to Theo. "And you brought the guest of honor. Excellent. Let's make the swap. The drive for the boy." Theo, overwhelmed by the noise and the lights and the grinning plastic mask, began to tremble. His breath hitched. The high-pitched, frantic whine started in his throat, the prelude to a full-blown panic. I moved instantly, stepping between him and Sarto, shielding his body with mine. "Hey, Theo," I whispered, pressing my face close to his. "Look at me. Only me. We're playing a game. It's the counting game. Look at the big wheel. How many red lights can you see?" "Let's count them." "I see one." "One," he whimpered, his small fingers twisting in Damien's shirt. "Good. Where's two? I see two." "Two." "This is all very touching," a smooth voice said. Benedict Cole stepped out of the shadow of the stall. He had changed. He was in a pristine, dry, perfectly tailored suit. He looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine, his hair perfectly in place despite the humidity. He was smiling. "But it's quite unnecessary. Elara, he'll be perfectly calm with me." "It's over, Benedict," Damien said. His voice was a low growl, vibrating with a rage I could feel in my teeth. "Over," Benedict laughed. "Damien, you still don't get it. You're still playing checkers." He gestured to his fake agents, who were now forming a loose, protective perimeter. "The BCI needs this. Blackfall needs this. Justice must be served." "This isn't justice," I spat, my fear replaced by a sudden, hot anger. "You—" He looked at me, his smile tightening, his eyes full of a strange, glittering hatred. "You, the Maid? You know what justice is?" "I know it doesn't use a 3-year-old as a shield," I shot back. His face darkened. I had hit a nerve. I pressed on, my voice rising, desperate to keep his attention locked on me. "You watched us, didn't you? Through a camera? You saw the cranes. You saw what I did. And you thought you could steal it. You thought you could copy and paste a mother's love to get what you wanted." "I am saving this city," he shrieked, his composure cracking, his voice pitching high. He took a step toward me, his hand raised. I saw Damien move in my peripheral vision, a slow, silent pivot, circling, using my distraction to flank him. It was working. The sky tore open. The first fat drops of rain turned into a torrential downpour in seconds. The crowd screamed, a single unified sound, and began to surge, running for cover. The fair's PA system, hit by the water, let out a deafening squeal of feedback. Sarto ripped the plastic mask from his face. The friendly facade was gone. "Enough of this theater, Rourke. The drive. Give it to me now." "Give it to me," Benedict commanded. "To hell with you both," Sarto roared. He pulled out a small detonator. "My men wired this pier. It's old. It's rotted. It won't take much. You give me the drive, or I send us all to the bottom of the North Lake. You have 30 seconds. My wrist buzzed. A text from Maya. "LMT is in position. Perimeter set, but they need audio confirmation. They need to hear Benedict admit to the exchange. They need him live." Benedict was laughing, a wild, unhinged sound. He was high on the chaos. He leaped onto the small, rain-slick stage of the charity stall and grabbed the microphone. The feedback squealed and then died, his voice booming over the pier. "Welcome, welcome, friends," he yelled into the storm. "We're here for the children, and we are about to start our grand auction. Our first item, a piece of modern art, a digital drive of unique data. Do I have a bid?" He was going to do it. He was going to sell the drive to Sarto, right on a hot mic, but the task force needed to hear Sarto's side, too. They needed the transaction. He was too far away. The wind was too loud. I looked at Damien. "I have to go up there." His head snapped to me. "No, Alara, no. That's a death sentence." "He'll talk to me," I pleaded, my voice desperate. "He's obsessed. He hates me, and he wants to prove he's better than me. I can make him say the words. Jax, you have to have a wire." Jax was already digging in his pocket. He produced a tiny, black button, a mic. "She's right, boss. He's a narcissist. She's the only one who can bait him. It's the only way to get the LMT to move." Damien stared at me, his face a mask of pure agony. This was worse than the tunnel. This was a choice. He was holding the little silver dandelion pin so tightly his knuckles were white. He was being asked to let me walk, alone, into the one place he couldn't protect me. "I will be right here," he said, his voice a raw whisper, his eyes locked on mine. "I will not let him lay a hand on you. I promise." Jax's hands were deft, clipping the tiny mic to the inside of my collar, shielded from the rain by my jacket. "It's live. We'll hear everything." My heart was a hummingbird, trapped in my ribs. "Count the lights," I whispered to Theo, kissing his damp forehead. "Stay with Papa." I turned. I let go of Damien's hand, the heavy weight of his signet ring in my pocket, the cool metal of the bracelet on my wrist. I squared my shoulders, and I walked out of the shadows, through the driving rain, and up the 3 steps to the stage, into the blinding white spotlight. Benedict turned, his smile widening. He thought I was his prize. The last thing I saw before I faced him was Damien's face. He was watching me go. His expression shattered, like a man watching the last light in his world walk into the dark. I walked onto the stage. The wind and rain hit me in a wave, cold and sharp. The spotlight was a hot, blind eye, making me an island in the chaos. Benedict was beaming, his face slick with rain, his eyes glittering with a victor's madness. He saw me, and his smile widened. He actually offered me the microphone, a gesture of such supreme arrogance it almost made me laugh. I took it. My hand was steady. The cold had numbed the fear. I didn't look at him. I looked past him, at the dark, churning mass of the Blackfall River, at the panicked crowd. "Good evening," I said. My voice didn't shake. It boomed over the pier, amplified, cutting through the storm. "We're here tonight to donate for the children." I turned my eyes to him, injecting a note of false, wide-eyed wonder. The children who just need peace. Benedict laughed, soaking up the attention. "Exactly, Alara. Peace, security, things this city has lacked, thanks to men who operate in the shadows." He was playing to his imaginary BCI agents. It's so wonderful," I continued, my voice dripping with fake innocence. I could feel the tiny mic button on my collar. cold against my skin, that you were able to arrange all this. The Morning Ember Fund is doing so much good, and to have the BCI's official support, however did you manage it? This was his moment. He had his audience. He leaned into the mic next to me, his voice smooth and self-congratulatory. It's about vision, Alara. It's about knowing who to trust. While Damien was busy with his nighttime affairs, I was building legitimate bridges. I have the full authorization of the BCI commissioner himself. This auction, he gestured grandly to Sarto, who was watching with growing impatience, is a fully sanctioned transfer of assets to secure the fund's future. In the comms van parked 2 streets away, I knew Maya would be nodding, recording. We have it, I could almost hear her say. He said transfer of assets and sanctioned. LMT is go, but they weren't moving. Not yet. A transfer of assets? I asked, forcing confusion into my voice. So Mr. Sarto is making a large donation. A very large donation, Sarto himself yelled, his patience gone. He held up the black box. Now let's get on with it. Coal the drive. Of course, Benedict said, still smiling. Our first bid for the future of Black Falls children, from Mr. Kellen Sarto. They're not moving. Jax's voice crackled, not over the speakers, but in Damien's ear, a conversation I couldn't hear. They're in position, but they're holding. Sarto's hand is still on the trigger. They move. He blows the pier. They need the device. Boss, they have to find the device. I saw Damien move, and he didn't look at me. He and Jax, who had been a shadow by the donut stand, simply melted into the chaos behind the stage. They dropped down, vanishing under the pier's main structure. They were hunting, in the dark, churning water, for Sarto's bombs. I had to keep Benedict talking, but if it's a donation, why is he getting the unique data? Benedict's smile faltered. My stupidity was annoying him. It's a collateral guarantee, Alara, a simple, boring financial procedure, something you wouldn't. A flash of light from the shore. A tactical LMT agent, moving too soon, his rain slicker reflecting the Ferris wheel. Traitors! Sarto shrieked, his eyes darting to the shore. He saw the movement. He thought it was Damien's men. He didn't hesitate. He ripped a firearm from under his jacket, not the detonator, a gun, and fired one shot straight up into the black sky. That was it. The sound, a sharp crack over the music and the rain, broke the crowd. The panic became a stampede. The pier, which had been emptying, became a surge of screaming bodies, a human wave flowing back toward the shore. I was knocked off my feet, falling hard onto the wet stage. Theo! Damien's roar. It wasn't over the comms. It was from below me. He wasn't thinking about the bomb. He was thinking about his son. The donut stand where I had left him with Damien was overturned. My heart stopped. I jumped off the stage, shoving, screaming, fighting my way through the tide of people. Theo! I found him. He was huddled behind the overturned, sputtering fryer, his small body shaking, his hands locked over his ears. He was terrified, but he was safe. I collapsed, grabbing him, pulling him tight against my chest. Hey, I'm here. I've got you. It's just noise. I pressed my hand against his small back, my fingers cold and numb, and tapped. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. His eyes, wide with a terror that was all too familiar, found mine. He took a ragged, shuddering breath, and he nodded. He remembered. He was bringing himself back. What a touching, pathetic reunion. Benedict's voice. I spun around, shielding Theo, but he was off the stage now, and he wasn't alone. He had an arm locked around Mrs. Prin's throat. She must have come from the house, seen the chaos on the monitors, come looking for us. She came looking for the boy, Benedict sneered, his face a mask of contempt. A small, dark blade was pressed just under her ear. Damien, he bellowed, his voice raw. Show yourself now or I'll cut this old woman's throat right here. Damien emerged from under the pier, about 20 yards away. He was soaking wet, covered in grime and seaweed, but he was on his feet. His weapon was at his side, but he held his hands up, empty, showing them. This was it. Benedict was distracted by Damien. Sarto was watching the LMT agents, who were frozen by the hostage situation. This was our plan B, the blind spot. I looked at Damien. Our eyes met across the rain-swept pier. I didn't have the pin. He did. I raised my hand, my fingers touching the empty, rain-soaked spot on my collar where my dandelion pin used to be. It was a silent signal. The blind spot. The camera. Now. He nodded. A single, sharp dip of his chin. He understood. I took a step forward, putting myself between Benedict and Damien, keeping Theo tucked behind my legs. You don't want her. Benedict, I said, my voice low and calming, projecting only for him, for the mic. She's not the prize. It's me you hate. Isn't it? I'm the one who got in. You think I hate you? He laughed, a high, thin sound. You're nothing. You're just the help. I'm the one he trusts, I said, jabbing a finger at my own chest. I'm the one who got him to breathe. You just want to be seen. I remember at the dinner, you talked about your father, how he never saw your successes. This isn't about justice. This is about you, needing someone, anyone, to finally say you did a good job. It hit him. I saw it. The arrogance, the rage, it all just deflated. His grip on Mrs. Prin loosened. His eyes, the glittering mask, flickered. He was that little boy again, the one who never got the approval he was starving for. I did. Move, Mrs. Prin was no victim. She stomped her heel hard on his expensive shoe and threw her head back, slamming her skull into his nose. He howled, his hand flying to his face. She broke free, scrambling away. It happened all at once. Task force, go, go, go. The LMT agents swarmed the pier, a wave of black slickers. No! Sarto screamed. He wasn't trying to shoot. He knew it was over. He looked at the detonator in his hand. If I go, you all go. He slammed his thumb down on the main button. A high-pitched, deafening beep cut through the air. A small, red digital display on the detonator lit up 60. 59, 58. He triggered the timer, Jax's voice from under the pier. The last charge, it's right under us. It's on a 60-second fuse. LMT agents grabbed Sarto, tackling him, trying to rip the detonator from his hands. It didn't matter. It was live. Benedict was on his stomach, his face in a puddle, a boot on his neck, cuffed. But the bomb was live. Damien and Jax were gone, dived back under the stage into the churning, rising water. 40, an agent yelled. I couldn't run. I was frozen. I just held Theo, his face pressed into my neck. 39, I whispered into his ear, my voice shaking so hard I could barely speak. We're counting, buddy. Just a counting game. 38, 37. Under the stage, it was black. The water was at their chests, a single charge, blinking red. It's complex, Jax yelled over the storm, his light flashing on a nest of wires. It's not a simple circuit. Which wire, boss, which one? 20, I whispered, my voice breaking. I could feel Theo's small heart hammering against mine. 19. The water, Damien's voice roared, a sudden, terrible revelation. It's a dead man's switch. It's wired to the water level, the tide. It's not the red one. It's the failsafe. Cut the main power, the green one. Jax cut it. 10-9-8, an agent screamed, his voice cracking. I squeezed my eyes shut. I kissed Theo's hair. 7-6, I breathed. I love you. I love you. A 5, Damien roared. I heard the shing of his knife, a brutal upward thrust into the wiring block. Silence. The high-pitched beep stopped. The red light on the detonator, still in Sarto's struggling hand, went black. For a full second, the only sound on the pier was the rain. It hammered the wooden planks. The wind howled. The waves crashed. But the pier was still. I opened my eyes. Sarto was screaming, a high animal sound. As they cuffed him, Benedict was sobbing, his face in the mud. The LMT agents were frozen, looking at the dead device in their hands. Damien and Jax emerged from under the stage. They were soaking, exhausted, covered in filth, but they were alive. Damien's eyes found mine. He was alive. The crowd was gone, the fake agents were cuffed, the music was dead, and the rain, no longer a threat, just fell, a heavy, clean sheet, washing the pier, washing away the fear, and washing away the night. The fluorescent lights of the Lake Meridian Task Force headquarters were a harsher assault than the storm had been. After the chaos of the pier, the shouting, the rain, the primal fear, this sterile gray box felt like a tomb. It was 5 a.m, the city outside still dark, and the air inside tasted of burnt coffee and cheap industrial cleaner. Theo was a dead weight on my shoulder, asleep in a way that was deeper than exhaustion. He was a child who had absorbed the world's trauma and, finding it too much, had simply checked out. I held him, my arms aching, and watched through a glass partition as Damien stood in a briefing room. He was still in his soaked, grime-covered clothes. His hair was matted with river water. My dandelion pin was still visible, high on his chest, a single, absurd spot of silver. He was facing a man in a crisp, dry suit, Agent Thorne, the man in charge. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew this ritual. I had seen it on TV, heard about it in the whispers of Blackfall. Thorne was offering the deal. You're a criminal, Rourke, but you're a useful criminal. Sarto is gone. Benedict is gone. But the rot in the NMC, the other families, they're still out there. Work for us. Be our ear. Be our cleanup man. Damien was rigid, his hands fisted at his sides. Thorne was pushing a piece of paper across the table. Immunity. A clean slate. The devil's handshake. Damien's gaze lifted. He looked past Thorne, through the glass, his eyes finding mine. He saw me, holding his son. He saw the world he had nearly lost, the small, fragile island of calm I had built, and the fortress he had almost buried us in. His face, which had been a mask of stone, cracked. He looked at Theo, his expression softening, and then he looked at me. He had a choice, the old power, or a new life. He turned back to Thorne. He said 2 words. I could read his lips. I'm done. He shook his head, a single, decisive motion. He put his palms flat on the table, leaned in, and said something else. Thorne's face went white. Damien wasn't negotiating. He was dictating. He slid the unsigned paper back across the table, turned his back on the agent, and walked out of the room. He pulled the door open, the whoosh of the seals breaking the silence. He didn't look at me. He just gently, so gently, took his sleeping son from my arms. Let's go home, he said. The ride back to Rookhaven was silent. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky a bruised purple. Maya drove, her face grim. Jack sat in the passenger seat, his bandaged head leaning against the window. Damien and I were in the back, Theo asleep between us. The North Lake Community Fund is solvent, Maya said, her voice the first to break the quiet. She was speaking to Damien, but her eyes were on me in the rearview mirror. The LMT has seized all of Benedict's offshore accounts. We're using the Morning Ember assets, the clean ones, to fund it. I'm filing the paperwork this morning to purchase the docklands at Grey Wharf. We're turning Pier 7 into a sensory center for children, like Theo. Damien just nodded, his gaze on the passing slums of the Iron Bridge district. I'm out, boss, Jack said, his voice rough. Effective today. Damien turned. Jax! It's not a negotiation, Jack said, echoing Damien's own finality. The pier watching Alara walk out there, I'm done with this life. I'm starting my own firm, Family Security, specializing in complex cases, families who need protection for kids with sensitivities. I'll be my own boss. I'll make my own rules. You'll be the best, Damien said, and it was settled. Our first stop wasn't the estate, it was St. Jude's Hospital. The rain had stopped, and the morning air was cold and clean. Mrs. Prin was in a curtained-off cubicle, looking pale but furious, a small bandage on her temple. The indignity. She was sputtering as a nurse checked her blood pressure. That accountant put his hands on me. Damien walked in. She stopped. Her anger fading, she looked at him, at his ruined suit, at Theo, who was now stirring, blinking in the light. "They're fine, Mrs. Prynne," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "We're all fine." She reached out, her hand shaking, and patted his arm. "You're a fool, Damien Rourke. You always were, but you're a good fool." She looked at him, her eyes sharp. "You spent your whole life trying to get more power, more money, more quiet. You're only happy when you have enough. Remember that." He nodded, humbled. While he was signing her discharge papers, a doctor in blue scrubs approached me. "Miss Quinn, Ilara Quinn?" My heart stopped. "Yes, is it my brother?" "Rowan?" He smiled, a kind, tired face. "He's a fighter. I'm Doctor. Alani, we got some unexpected news this morning. You know we've been trying to get approval for the new neural stim procedure." "Yes, but the insurance wouldn't—" "It doesn't matter. A new grant just came through, about an hour ago, from a North Lake Community Fund. It's fully endowed. It's covering the entire procedure, plus post-op physical therapy. We're scheduling him for tomorrow morning." I staggered, my hand on the wall. It wasn't Damien. It wasn't his money. It wasn't a favor. It was clean. It was Maya. It was real. I started to cry, silent, racking sobs of pure, unadulterated relief. Rowan was going to be okay. I found Damien in the hallway, waiting. The fight was over, the adrenaline was gone, and he looked empty. He was a man who had just dismantled his entire life in the span of 6 hours. "He's Rowan. He's getting the surgery," I whispered, wiping my face. "I heard," he said. "Maya is efficient." "Thank you." "I did nothing. Ilara, that was all clean." He leaned his head back against the sterile white wall. "My father, he raised me to be a stone. He told me that to be a Rourke was to be an unmovable object, that attachments were a liability, that love was a weakness. So I built a fortress of silence. I thought all these years that silence was strength." He looked at me, his gray eyes bleak. You came into my house. You were just a maid, and you showed me that my silence wasn't strength. It was just loud. It was a vacuum. It was terror." I stepped closer to him. Theo was on his hip, awake now, playing with the silver dandelion pin on his father's chest. "You weren't strong," I said, my voice soft but sure. "You were just numb. There's a difference." I reached up, my hand hovering, not sure of my right to touch him. "Strength isn't being a stone, Damien. Strength is listening. It's hearing a child screaming in a room, and instead of locking the door, you kneel down. You learn to breathe with him." My hand found his. "You're learning to listen, to him, to me." The hallway was quiet, the air thick with antiseptic and unsaid words, the magnetism from the archery range, the desperate heat from the panic room. It was all back, but different. It was calm. It was earned. He leaned in, his other hand came up, his fingers brushing my cheek. "Ilara, Ara," a small, sleepy voice. Theo, tucked between us, looked from my face to his father's. He smiled, a slow, drowsy smile. "Papa, Ara, home." Damien and I broke apart, but the spell wasn't broken. We both looked at Theo, and we laughed, a real, shared, exhausted laugh. Damien didn't pull away completely. He just rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closing for a second. His skin was warm. It was a touch more intimate than any kiss. "Home," he promised. "Mr. Rourke." Agent Thorne. He was standing at the end of the hall. He looked at me, his face official. "Miss Quinn, I'm glad I caught you. We'll need your official testimony about Benedict Cole's actions, specifically the fraudulent BCI credentials and the audio you captured on the stage." I looked at Damien, who nodded. I turned back to Thorne. "Yes, I will testify, on one condition." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Theo Rourke, his name, his image, his medical history, none of it. It's not part of the record. He's a 3-year-old boy. He's not a witness. He's a victim. He's to be protected, completely, or I don't remember a thing." Thorne held my gaze. He saw the same iron I had just seen in Damien. Agreed, Miss Quinn. We'll seal his records. When we finally got back to Rookhaven, the sun was high. Mrs. Prin immediately took Theo for a bath and a real meal. Damien and I were left standing in the grand, silent foyer. On the polished, mahogany hall table, on a silver tray, was a single, white envelope. It was crisp, dry. It hadn't been there when we left. Damien picked it up. There was no stamp, no address. It had been delivered by hand, sometime after the LMT raid. He ripped it open. It was a single sheet of paper, one line in typed block letters. The story isn't over. Sarto's in a cage, but the NMC still has his people. The river runs deep. Damien read it, his face hardening. He hadn't dismantled the threat. He had just angered it. They were still in the shadows. He looked at the note. He looked at me. And he made the final choice. "They're right," he said, his voice quiet. "We can't be safe as long as we're a shadow they can hunt." He walked to the house intercom, his hand steady. "Maya, get me the Blackfall Chronicle. Get me Channel 4. I'm holding a press conference. Tomorrow at noon here." I stared at him. "A press conference, Damien? That's insane. You'll be exposed." "Exactly," he said. He looked around at the dark wood, the marble floors, the beautiful, cold fortress his father had built. "I'm not just ending the nighttime transport. I'm ending this house, this legacy. What are you going to do?" He walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet drapes, letting the bright, unfiltered sunlight flood the room for the first time. "I'm turning the lights on. I'm telling them everything, and I'm giving it away. Rookhaven is no longer a private estate. It's becoming the Rookhaven Commons, a quiet place for the community. The only way to be safe is to have nothing left to hide." Rookhaven was no longer a fortress. It was a beacon. 2 months had passed since the night on the pier. 2 months of grueling depositions, of legal battles waged by Maya, of Rowan's slow and steady recovery, and 2 months of tearing down walls, both literal and metaphorical. Tonight was the grand opening of the Rookhaven Commons. Where there had been high, imposing stone walls, there were now open gates. Where there had been shadowy, silent lawns, there were now thousands of people from Blackfall wandering the grounds, their faces upturned. The house itself, once a monolith of dark stone, was now glowing from within. I had spent the last 2 weeks with Theo, folding. We folded hundreds of paper cranes, just like the ones I had made in his playroom, but now they were every color of the rainbow. We, along with a team of community volunteers, had strung them up with small, warm lights. They hung from the oak trees and lined the pathways, illuminating the estate, guiding the people in. The air didn't smell of old money and beeswax anymore. It smelled of cider, roasting chestnuts from food stalls, and the crisp, clean air of autumn. The sound was not a child's wail. It was the low, happy murmur of a crowd, the music of a string quartet on the lawn. I stood on the wide terrace, watching. Theo was holding my hand, his other hand clutching a small, stuffed bear, a new one, bought from a store, personally inspected and x-rayed by a very apologetic Jax. "So many people, Ara," Theo whispered, his eyes wide. He wasn't scared, he was curious. "They're here to see the new house. Buddy," I whispered back. "It's our house," he said, with the simple conviction of a 3-year-old. A spotlight hit the main stage, set up on the great lawn. Damien stepped up to the podium. He wasn't in a dark, severe suit. He was in a simple, well-cut charcoal wool coat, open at the neck. He looked human. Maya stood to his left and to his right. A stern-looking woman I knew was the official notary from the Greywater County Registrar. Cameras were everywhere, broadcasting this live. This was his gamble. This was his all-in. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady, carrying over the crowd. "For 100 years, this house has been a symbol of power. It was a fortress, built by my grandfather and maintained by my father. It was built to keep the world out." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd and then finding mine. "It was a house built on fear," he said, "and I have learned, very recently, that fear is a terrible foundation. It is not strength, it is a prison." He turned to the notary. "Today, that ends." He took a pen and began to sign the stack of documents on the podium. "As of 7 o'clock tonight, I am dissolving the Rourke Night Heritage, as my father called it. Every asset associated with the North Lake transport routes, the shipping lines, the holding companies, all of it is being liquidated." A gasp went through the crowd. "The proceeds," he continued, "are being placed in a permanent, irrevocable trust managed by the new North Lake Community Fund to be overseen by Miss Maya Corin." He motioned to her, and Maya gave a single, sharp nod. "And this house," he said, "Rookhaven is no longer a private estate. It is hereby gifted to the people of Blackfall, to be known as the Rookhaven Commons, a quiet place for children, a sensory center, a public park, a place to grow." He signed the last page with a flourish. "The shadows of Blackfall have had their day. I am stepping into the light." The crowd was stunned into silence, and then a wave of applause started, spreading from the front row all the way to the gates. "Not so fast, Rourke." The voice cut through the applause. A side gate, one I hadn't seen, burst open. A dozen men in the dark blue uniforms of the North Lake Maritime Commission pushed through, their faces grim, led by a hard-faced officer. They were pushing their way toward the stage. My heart stopped. The note. The NMC still has his people. This was it, the last gasp. The officer held up a warrant. "Damien Rourke, you are under arrest for outstanding maritime violations dating back 10 years. Your assets are hereby frozen." The cameras swarmed them. The crowd recoiled. This was the final trap. Sarto had lost, but his network was still alive, and they were trying to drag Damien back into the dark with them. Damien went still, his hands flat on the podium. And then Maya smiled. She stepped forward, taking the microphone. "Thank you for coming, Officer Reed. We were expecting you." The officer froze. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya said to the cameras, "as part of our commitment to full transparency, we knew there might be lingering administrative issues from the old NMC." She gestured to a quiet group of men in suits by the side of the stage, men I hadn't noticed, which is why we invited auditors from the Lake Regional Oversight Committee to be here tonight, to review this warrant in person. One of the suits stepped forward and took the paper from Officer Reed. He looked at it for no more than 3 seconds. "Officer," the auditor said, his voice amplified, "this warrant is counterfeit. The signature is forged." He pulled a small phone from his pocket. "And according to my data, your personal bank account received a deposit of $50,000 this morning from a holding company still linked to Kellen Sarto." The color drained from Officer Reed's face. The cameras turned on him, their flashes like gunfire. He and his men didn't run. They just deflated. The institutional threat, the last echo of the old empire, had just collapsed under the full glare of the public spotlight. The LROC auditors, the real authority, quietly surrounded the NMC men and escorted them off the property. The crowd erupted. It was a roar of genuine victory. The last thread was cut. It was truly over. Damien watched them go, his shoulders finally, fully relaxing. He turned, his face clear, and looked for Theo. He stepped off the stage, ignoring the notary, ignoring Maya, and walked straight to us. He didn't bend, he knelt, his knee pressing into the damp grass, so he was eye to eye with his son. "Hey, Papa," Theo whispered, reaching out and touching his father's face. "Hey, Theo," Damien's voice was thick, his composure cracking. I learned something from you." He took a shaky breath. "You taught me that when you kiss someone, it means you trust them." Theo smiled, a pure, uncomplicated beam of light. He leaned forward and, in front of all of Blackfall, in front of the cameras, he placed a small, perfect kiss on his father's cheek. The entire lawn went silent, 1,000 people holding their breath, and then, the applause that came wasn't just for the donation. It was for this. It was for the man who had found his heart. Damien stood up, his eyes shining. He turned to me. "Alara Quinn," he said, and the world narrowed to just his face. "I have spent my entire life building a fortress, and you tore it down in a week with just paper and patience." He reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out the signet ring. That was in a vault, its power gone. He pulled out a small, simple velvet box. "In Blackfall," he said, his voice so low only I could hear it, "I was told I needed a queen, a woman of power, a queen of the night." He opened the box. It wasn't a diamond. It was a single luminous, gray-blue pearl, a lake pearl, simple, organic, and calm. "I don't need a queen of the night. Alara, I need a light to come home to. I need my anchor. I need my partner." He slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. "Will you build this new life with me? Will you stay?" I didn't have to think. I didn't have to weigh the options. I didn't have to check for cameras. I threw my arms around his neck, burying my face in his coat. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." He held me, his arms locking around my waist, lifting me off the ground. Later that night, long after the crowds had gone, long after Theo was asleep in his own bed for the first time without a monitor, we found ourselves on the roof. The greenhouse was silent. The only light came from the moon. The olive trees were still, their leaves silver in the dark. The hidden camera was long gone, the hole it left now covered by a climbing jasmine vine. He was standing by the pot where we had all knelt. That first day, I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist. Resting my cheek against his back, I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart. He turned, his arms coming around me. He didn't kiss me. Not yet. He just held me, his hands splayed wide against my back, my head resting over his heart. We just breathed in 2, 3, 4, a shared, silent rhythm. "It's safe," I whispered. "It's safe," he agreed. He tilted my chin up, his thumb brushing my cheek. His gaze was deep, searching, and filled with a profound, quiet love. He lowered his head, slowly, giving me every chance to turn away. I met him halfway. The kiss wasn't the frantic, desperate collision from the panic room. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise. It was the first, real, unhurried breath of a new life. His lips were soft, sure, and all the loneliness I had seen in him, all the emptiness in my own life, just dissolved. My hand slid up his chest, around his neck, and his arms tightened, pulling me flush against him. And there was no fear. There was just trust. A small sound, a creak of the door. We broke apart, slightly. Mrs. Prin was standing there, a tray with 2 glasses of water in her hand. She looked at us, at Damien's hand on my cheek, at mine on his chest. She didn't look flustered. She didn't apologize. She just smiled, a real, warm, genuine smile. She set the tray down on a table, turned around, and pulled the heavy door shut, leaving us to our peace. Damien laughed, a low, warm rumble in his chest. He rested his forehead against mine. "I love you, Alara Quinn." "I love you, Damien Rourke," I whispered back. He kissed me again, and in the dark corners of the garden, a small colony of fireflies, roused by the warmth, began to flicker, a tiny constellation of all natural, all too real stars. The next morning, a new sign was hung at the gates. It was simple, painted wood, Rookhaven Commons, a quiet place to grow. Jax was in the driveway, not in a suit but in a polo shirt, directing a class of young parents on sensory-safe home security. Maya was on the phone, her feet up on her new desk, arguing with the governor about policy reform. Rowan was in physical therapy, learning to walk again. And we were at the lake, the boathouse. The scene of our terror had been repainted a bright, welcoming white. Damien, Theo, and I stood on the end of the dock. The water was calm, reflecting the bright morning sun. We each held a paper crane. "Some empires," I said, watching the light dance on the water, "are built on fear. Damien took my hand, his new ring a simple, solid weight next to my pearl. We chose to build ours on trust. We held our cranes out. 1, 2, tree, Theo shouted. We let them go, 3 paper birds, catching the breeze, sailing out onto the water, toward the new day. Thank you so much for listening to our story. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below to say hello. Share your thoughts and connect with other fans. Your support means everything. Please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video. And if you really loved it, hit that hype button to help share this story with even more people.